their representatives, and then the catch the eye. So the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are indeed close to celebrating the first anniversary of the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. We are proud of this strategy and also happy to acknowledge that it incorporates most of the recommendations that were made by European Parliament resolution last year, July. This strategy is really a key building block for the European Green Deal, because chemicals are quite literally the basis of our future. When we think of low carbon, zero pollution, of resource efficient technologies, we actually are thinking about chemicals. The chemicals are there in everything we do and contribute to our well-being, but at the same time, they can cause harm. We hear some alarm bells ringing from various areas. Many of our people suffer from diseases like diabetes or obesity, where endocrine disruptors could be involved. Exposure to harmful chemicals is also one of the causes behind cancers, respiratory diseases, and diseases to our immune system. Persistent chemicals like PFAS have contaminated entire regions, and they are even found in some areas in drinking water in soils where crops grow, also in crops themselves. Certain sections of the population, including the most vulnerable, like children, are still exposed to harmful chemicals through consumer products in particular. That's why we need to act. And the Commission remains, therefore, as committed as ever to the strategy's vision of toxic-free environment, where chemicals contribute to the society, but also avoid harm to the planet and the current and the future generation. Let me give you a short update of where we are with the implementations of 85 actions of the strategy. First of all, we're working on the revision of the two cornerstones of the chemicals legislation, REACH and the CLP, the regulation of classification, labeling, and packaging of chemicals. The roadmaps for those revisions were published in May, and stakeholders gave us feedback. The two revisions will deliver on some of the main actions of the strategy, such as establishing hazard classes for endocrine disruptors, introducing mixture assessment factor under REACH, and restricting the most harmful substances in consumer products and for professional users. The Commission has also started the revision of some product legislation, in particular on food contact materials, cosmetics, and toys, to achieve the objectives of the strategy, in particular to restrict the most harmful substances in those product categories. We have recently launched a number of studies to support our technical work. For each alone, we have 10 studies, and we are in constant dialogue with stakeholders who are consulted on the various steps. We plan to adopt those proposals next year. While we are revising legislation in order to restrict the most harmful substances in consumer products, we're also prioritizing those substances for restrictions within the implementation of REACH regulation. For that, we are working on a roadmap together with Chemicals Agency, which has been already discussed with member states and stakeholders, and that will be published by the end of this year. Also, when talking about the most harmful substances, I would like to update you on what we're doing as regards the highly fluorinated substances contamination, the PFAS contamination. The strategy outlines a set of actions in the sense which aim at ensuring that the use of PFAS is phased out in EU unless it's proven essential to society. Under REACH, the European Commission requested the Chemicals Agency to prepare a restriction dossier on all PFAS in fire-fighting foams, which are the cause of many environmental contaminations. The work for restricting all the other uses of PFAS has also started at the initiative of some member states, and the Commission will prepare the legal text for the restriction as soon as the procedure in Chemicals Agency is finished. More actions on those substances are taking place under other pieces of legislation, for example, on industrial emissions, or on food safety, or on surface and groundwater. While we are in the process of revising legislation, we're also developing horizontal concepts, which will be beneficial across policy areas. First, the concept of essential use, for which the Commission will propose criteria and guidance next year. The concept will enable us to phase out the most harmful chemicals faster, while allowing the uses which are essential for society. The second key concept is safe and sustainable by design, chemicals and materials. Again, we will propose criteria and map options for its application next year. These criteria should bring clarity to what the concept means, align policy measures and funding, and attract investors. Obviously, the input of the stakeholders in our work will be absolutely essential to develop sound concepts. Safe and sustainable by design brings me to another important pillar in the strategy, promoting research and innovation, in particular to drive the transition to safe and sustainable chemicals. The Commission has already mobilized European Union funding opportunities, in particular under Horizon Europe and LIFE programs, and is working with member states to streamline the transition into the recovery and resilience national plans and cohesion programs. A key milestone for orienting funds through a strategic approach will be the strategic research and innovation agenda for chemicals that we plan to publish around mid-2022. The strategy also announces one substance, one assessment process to make decision-making faster, as well as more consistent and predictable. This year, we already established a coordination mechanism, which includes also a new expert group with member states and EU agencies to discuss how to harmonize safety assessment across chemical legislation. We also plan to make 3 legal proposals. One, a horizontal proposal for the attribution of tasks on chemicals to EU agencies. A proposal on transparency and reuse of data to allow EU and national authorities to commission testing, and proposal for chemical agencies founding regulation to improve predictability and stability of these agencies' financing. The one substance, one assessment approach also includes the development of a common open data portal on chemicals. We plan to have this platform ready by the end of 2023. Finally, we are all aware that strong legislation does not fulfill its objectives without effective enforcement and full compliance. In the strategy, we propose actions for improving both. The REACH revision should make it possible to revoke registration numbers for non-compliant cases, to establish an audit capacity, and to strengthen the principle no data, no market. Enforcement is a member state competence, but at the EU level, we are supporting through additional measures and tools on market surveillance and to increase cooperation with online markets. This topic brings me to my final point, the high-level roundtable. This group was established this year and will advise the Commission on enforcement as its first topic for discussion in November. The roundtable is composed of 32 members from wide stakeholder community who not only support us in the journey with their advice and insights, but they also fulfill the role of ambassadors for the chemical strategy for sustainability. The European Parliament was also invited to attend the meetings, and your presence will be surely appreciated. The next meeting, by the way, is taking place on the 25th of November. So, Mr. Chair, honourable members, as you will probably see, we have been very dynamic in starting up many strands of action to achieve our ambitions, the revision of legislation, making it more coherent, the studies, prep work to define essential use and safe and sustainable design, and the increased digitalization of knowledge and data on chemicals. We really count on your continued support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move to the questions with the coordinators or their representatives, and I formally open the CATGI to assess the number of questions to see if we do it in one row or two rows. So first, with the EPP, Jens Giesecke.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and dear colleagues. In Europe, we're very proud of the fact that our industry has the world standards that of the highest order. And there are lots of SMEs that really are at the top of the game in this. And everywhere we can say that it's a very strongly regulated market. And we try to step up the rigidity of the rules, being very strict and being mindful of the fact we need to stop people from going elsewhere and still producing for European markets. There is a threat to human health in Italy, moving away from a rational reuse of certain metals in a preventive approach cannot be the right approach. I think it is doomed to fail. I think there's a potential danger for people in their health. Doesn't that mean that potentially we may end up with chemicals being used? At the end of the day, it is the actual risk that needs to be managed. For example, the use of ethanol for disinfecting your cell phone. But of course, it's a matter of dosage that determines how hazardous it is. And playing a role in the risk assessment, that's quite a serious consideration. In the European recycling industry, we need to ensure that we effectively control and not just think just in academic or abstract terms. And of course, to having stringent rules will not necessarily always be the most efficient way. And scientifically, I support the Commission in saying that in Europe, we have an incredible amount of know-how and expertise, particularly in our national institutes. And here, for example, in the Federal Institute for Risk Research in Germany, there's a lot of know-how to be tapped into, and I think that we should get them to cooperate more. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to Jutta Guttelen for SND.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sadauskas. Thank you for joining us in the committee today, talking about this important topic. As you know, we from the S&D Group, we have welcomed the chemical strategy and the intention to step up the work against hazardous chemicals. We support the one substance, one assessment approach, and we believe that we need to do a step up on the work against endocrine disruptors, PFAS and other hazardous substances. We need to tackle the cocktail effect once and for all. This is something really important, particularly to protect vulnerable populations, not at least children who is very exposed. Can you give us a little more detail on how you intend to amend REACH to introduce the mixture assessment factor? I also want to express my support to the Belgian coalition who last week called for a ban on non-essential PFAS. It is unacceptable that substances prohibited for 40 years ago can still be found in our bodies. That is quite extreme, and it shows that we are far from doing what we need to do politically here. Lastly, I want to raise the global dimension. Today, COP15 starts to promote global solutions to loss of biodiversity, and in a few weeks we also have COP26. As we are more interlinked than ever, as the product design is so crucial to tackle the use of hazardous chemicals, we need to go global and find global solutions also for chemicals. What is your view on having a Paris Agreement also for chemicals? Thank you.
Thank you. We move to Frédéric Ries for Renew.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci à Monsieur Sadauskas. Je vous remercie de votre présence parmi nous. C'est essentiel.
Thank you very much for being here, and it's absolutely crucial that the Commission should be here and help us by giving us the state of play with respect to the new chemicals policies. Remember that 15 months ago, Parliament established lines, so I would like the means taken by the Commission to take the right direction. REACH was an essential step, but that was in 2005, 2006. Now we need the lines for the second phase, and I've got 3 questions. We have to be brief. 3 years ago, ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, explained, and something that made a lot of ruckus in the meeting, that more than 71% of chemicals manufactured had shortfalls as to their dangers. 654 companies were not respecting REACH, and some of the products were not in conformity and dangerous and hazardous to health. Secondly, endocrine disruptors. Indeed, the Commission has committed itself to establish a second category of risks with the endocrine disruptors with respect to the CLP. When will you be putting forth your legislative proposal to this effect? When will you commit to prohibit substances which have been identified as endocrine disruptors in daily consumption? For example, cosmetic, certain products that are in contact with foods. When are you going to do this? Now, with respect to PFAS, this huge group of chemicals like carpeting, anti-inflammatories, and others. Many of these chemicals are being used, and 5 member states, like Belgium, have said they're going to go further on looking into this. And you mentioned the European strategy of phasing out non-essential PFAS in REACH, and you mentioned 2023, 2024, 2025. But for 40 years, we've had evidence being accumulated. Could we not speed up this, because it's very difficult for the European citizens to imagine that this is being put off for 5 years?
Move to the Greens, passe à écoute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and also thanks to the Commission, because indeed this chemical strategy is very important and maybe sometimes a bit forgotten when we are talking about the challenges we are having for the next decades. We are always talking about climate neutral economy by 2050, a fully circular economy. But the Commission also said as part of the Green Deal, we will be toxic free by 2050. And for that, of course, this chemical strategy is quite crucial to achieve that. And for that reason, we also welcomed the chemical strategy. However, and this is what we were hoping to hear a bit more, but hopefully with a couple of questions we can get a bit more insight there. The chemical strategy was very good in announcing plans that will come, some even this year and a lot next year, but that doesn't mean exactly right away that it's clear when it will take into effect. And I think this is also quite important. So it's good to have proposals, but the Commission should also make clear when those proposals will have an effect on it. And maybe to start off with a couple of concrete questions and I hope concrete answers. First of all, for 2021, you still are planning, I hope, the roadmap for restrictions-based group approach. So the question is, of course, are you still planning to do that this year still? And then a very important question is, which group restrictions will you tackle first? I think that is very important to get a hands on. Then indeed, like Jutta, my colleague Jutta Gutteland, we have a question on the introduction of the mixture assessment factor that is prepared for 2022. When and how will REACH be adapted for that? Because it's a crucial element, but we would like to know how exactly it will play out. And the last point, we are very happy with the announcement of consumer products free from PBTs and endocrine disruptors also to be proposed in 2022. But when will consumer products effectively no longer contain chemicals that cause cancer? I think that is an answer that we would like to hear very precise as well. Not only that you will produce something next year, but also when we can have cancer-free products.
Thank you. We move to ID. Aurélia Beigneux is not in the system. No speaker for ECR, and we have for the left Anna Azakamp.
Thank you, Pascal. And thank you, Mr. Sadauskas. The cosmetics regulation has introduced a ban on animal testing since 2013. However, we are dismayed that the EU is still authorizing extensive testing for cosmetic ingredients under REACH for the exposure of workers and environment, even for chemical ingredients only used in cosmetics. The Guardian recently reported that 63 REACH-registered chemicals used only in cosmetics were subjected to 104 new animal experiments since in 2013 the ban was implemented. Existing safety assessment approaches without using animals could be and should be used for ensuring safety of workers and environment exposed to cosmetic ingredients. Does the Commission agree that the spirit of the cosmetics regulation should be applied to both consumers and workers as well, and clarify the requirements to rely solely on non-animal data for the safety assessment of cosmetic ingredients in the upcoming revision of the two regulations? And can the Commission clarify that the requirement to rely on non-animal data for the safety assessment of cosmetic ingredients must be applied and animal data rejected, regardless of the location and purpose of animal tests conducted after the cut-off periods described in Article 18 of the EU Cosmetics Regulation? Thank you.
Thank you. I will go directly to the Catch the Eye list. I have, for the time being, two speakers, Martin Osik and Jutta Paulus. So if you want to put your name in the list, please do so in the next minute. We start with Martin Osik for Renew.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Sadauskas, for interesting presentation. Indeed, I agree with Bas, and belated happy birthday, that the chemical strategy and kind of the toxic-free environment actually is essential. I think without it, we cannot really have a circular economy, because otherwise we have a circle of toxic chemicals. Hence, I really want to dig deeper in what you said. One thing is the authorization and restriction. I wonder what's the best setup to achieve quick regulation of the most hazardous chemicals and highest protection of health and environment in terms of speeding up both the substitution and restriction, and whether there is any feedback from the consultations with stakeholders and member states. On the non-essential uses, you mentioned something, but if you could go a bit deeper on how do you see it firming up, as well as safe by design. I think this is really important. And I maybe overheard the mixture assessment factor. So what's the progress there? On the roadmap for restrictions, now, will the roadmap allow addressing groups of substances to speed up assessment and protection? And what's the sense in the prioritization, or is there a sense in prioritization of among chemicals and how they will be addressed? On the EDCs, and I really support also what Frederick Ries was saying, I just puzzled why there is need to do an specific impact assessment. We know there is a problem, and I think we need to act. And if you're going to do that, how are you going to assess the savings in terms of human health and environment? Because we have a substantial human health cost, which also to some extent not only about the healthcare, but very serious impediment of quality of life. And last but not least, on the PFAS. I don't want to see it late, but what are you going to do to protect public health and environment before something comes out in 2024, let's say? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I have still two speakers for the Catch the Eye for the Greens, starting with Jutta Paulus.
Merci, Pascal, and thank you again, Mrs. Sarakal. Sorry, for presenting to us what the Commission is planning to do. And I'm really glad that you have already taken up some of the demands of our Green Action Plan for Sustainable Chemistry, which Sven Giegold and I put together last year or year before. I can't remember. It's so long already, where we said, well, we must change the principle from no data, no market to no proper data, no market. So I'm really glad that you are saying that the Commission will revoke registration numbers when the data is incomplete or faulty. I would like to remind all colleagues that are still skeptical for the need of a sustainable chemistry that novel entities such as chemicals are a planetary boundary where a limit value cannot be defined because of lack of knowledge. So if we have not enough knowledge to assess the dangers, we should really keep the precautionary principle in mind and try to limit the contamination of the environment as much as possible. I would like to thank especially Madame Ries for putting forward the problem of PFAS. I get mails constantly from citizens, from NGOs that are really in worries. Especially in Germany, we have a lot of contaminated military sites where the drinking water or surface water is contaminated with those chemicals. So I would like to know when and how is the Commission going to act on PFAS, not only in the registration issue, but also what is the Commission planning to do with those contaminated sites? Will there be aid to communities and citizens that are affected? And will also the polluter pays principle be applied, even if the polluter is a military facility? Thank you.
Thank you. And we move to the last question from Michel Rivasi.
Merci. Thank you, Pascal. And thank you, Commission, for all that information. I should like to come back to for this sustainable strategy for chemicals. The Commission committed itself to providing a model to make sure that hazardous chemicals prohibited in the EU will not be produced for export. You namely said you were ready to modify legislation which would be pertinent by 2023. And then there was a written question from one of my colleagues, and you changed your wording. It's a lot more vague, and you're saying, well, we could revise the regulation and prior consentment and with the regulation on registering and evaluation or assessment of chemicals and authorization of chemicals. Could the Commission clarify their wording, why the change has been made? Can the Commission, are they ready to make sure that chemicals would no longer be manufactured or find a way to prevent the export? And then if you export chemicals which are prohibited in Europe, they actually come back in the consumer's dishes. Now, how does the Commission intend to take measures to make sure that those hazardous chemicals are not used in production of crops imported into Europe and don't come into our food? This is very important, because how can we prohibit products that we feel are terribly hazardous but manufacture them to export into other developing countries or countries of Latin America, which come back to us in the food chain?
Merci.
Thank you.
Back to the Commission, Mr. Sadauskas.
Thank you for so many questions. I'm not sure I will be able to reply to all of them, not least because not everywhere. I don't have the full answer, because a lot will come out from various analyses that will be conducted in the next months. But let me try and to say anyway, reply to the most important ones. On Mr. Giesecke's question on cooperation between authorities, I fully agree, and this is what we try to do it also through one substance, one assessment, because we noticed that very often various authorities, as well as academic institutions, do extremely good analysis and very good assessments, but they're not relevant for regulation. I mean, we cannot use them because they're done in different ways, through different standards, through different protocols. This is what we want to avoid, wasting very good academic minds, and writing very theoretical assessments, but rather to prepare assessments that we can use or national authorities can use. So I fully agree that we are sitting on some of the best data in the world, and we have to make the best use of it. Therefore, data sharing and relevance, I think, is one of the big objectives here. There's been question on the mixture assessment, and there I can say that we are analyzing how to do it. Like all the other things, we'll have to follow the better regulation rules to which everybody is committed, including assessment of the impacts, and mixture assessment will be part of this. But I think we have already some ideas. Well, first of all, we have these factors which are being used in other parts, especially in the food safety area. But more importantly, what we are considering is looking into the chemical safety assessment, and those, especially that is documented in the chemical safety report and the REACH. And that will allow us a factor of the safety for all the chemicals that are registered under REACH. So, this is in principle the direction in which we're going, but more precise form and shape how it will take will have to be seen once we have the assessment of impacts and once we are closer to the legal drafting of the proposal. Speaking of idea from Jutta Guttenand on Paris Agreement for chemicals, I would really hope that the strategic approach to international measurement of chemicals, the SAICM, will be one of those. Well, not necessarily that it would amount to that level of being so notorious, but at least effective. We have some international instruments and agreements in the chemicals management, but we also need an overarching approach. And by the way, the strategic approach has basically expired last year, and we have to chart a new way. And the work is underway, and I really hope that we will be able to set ourselves very ambitious international agenda, but everybody will have to play their part, because Europe is very often accused by its own internal stakeholders of moving faster and further than anybody else and becoming irrelevant in this. So we have to drag everybody else along. Otherwise, indeed, we might risk being a bit irrelevant in international arena. Not to say that we are going to slow down, but we need everybody to play their part. Friederike Ries asked about the compliance, where we are after findings of incompliant dossiers. I can say that we are on track. Together with the Chemicals Agency, whose executive director you will hear later. He probably could give more testimonies to this. But we had an action plan between Commission and Chemicals Agency, how to reduce incompliance, which indeed was there. And so far things are improving. The quality of the dossiers is improving, but it's not to avoid admission that the registrants are struggling. It's not an easy go, because it takes a lot to to generate all that information to make your dossier compliant. So the situation is improving, but it will take still time in order to get to a fully satisfactory situation. There was a question by Friederike Ries and also by Mr. Hoysik about the PFAS and what happens in the meantime. Well, indeed, for these fluorinated substances, we have to follow the rules and the law. Of course, doing that as far as we can, and we need to base ourselves on the best available analysis, and that analysis will have to come from the Chemicals Agency, who is doing risk assessment and is also assessing the socioeconomic angles to this. So once we have the dossier, once we have a well-prepared proposal or dossier analysis from the Chemicals Agency, we'll be able to act. Be it the one that we have asked on a firefighting foam, or on all the other highly fluorinated substances, the dossier which is being prepared by member states. So I really hope that these member states, several member states, will prepare a good quality dossier to the Chemicals Agency so that we can receive this and then we can proceed with the action. In the meantime, the polluter pays principle applies. So member states who have the full responsibility implementing this principle have to act, and when they find a polluted site, they have to identify who is responsible for that, in line also with the Environmental Liability Directive and the principles therein, and to hold everybody accountable if there is a proof that the damage has been done. And these actors have to also remedy or to pay for that remedy. So the principles are there, but of course, in order to be more precise and to prevent the whole pollution, that's why we need all these dossiers from the agency, which I'm pretty sure will come really in good quality. Frederic Ries also asked when the endocrine disruptors will be banned. Well, some of them, they are already banned in the legislation, but we don't have a horizontal and systemic approach here. So the different pieces of legislation, be in cosmetics or toys or REACH itself, or even under classification and labeling, the proposals will come next year. Then we'll need to negotiate. I mean, you will need to negotiate together with the Council, and we hope that these negotiations will conclude successfully very soon, so that we can put in place the measures to address the endocrine disruptors in various products, especially in the consumer products. Bas Eickhout asked about the cancer-free products. When I can say, well, I mean, for some of the products, it's already banned in principle. You know, the last restriction I think I can recall was the REACH cancer ban in the textiles. But of course, we have to be sure that we address carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic substances in consumer products all across, and that requires both introducing these categories and identifying the substances under the so-called chemical legislation, as well as making sure that they are properly restricted or banned under the legislation which is relevant for the consumer products. So it's sort of two-step approach, or the parallel approach. Again, we talk about co-legislation, so it will take some time. But I think if we send the signal to the market already now that this is the direction of where we're going, even before the laws are enacted, this will be taken up as a very serious message to the market players, who probably will start phasing out these substances even before we require. Answer to Madame Hazenkamp's approach to animals, animal testing, as in cosmetics. We have the requirement to reduce animal testing, so there is no question about it. That it's both a general requirement as well as under different pieces of legislation. For example, when we implement the REACH regulation, if companies want to do an animal testing, they have to get the permission, and only when it's absolutely indispensable, especially in life-saving cases, things like for pharmaceuticals elsewhere, this is when it is allowed. So I think we can admit that for now we don't have fully animal-free testing methods there yet, but the field is really increasing, and the push will definitely come. And in fact, the one action, which is one substance, one assessment, would help here. Why is that so? Because we would be able to reuse the data, the non-animal data, or even animal data where it was used for the other assessments. Like this, we avoid animal testing, which is not necessary, which is repetitive, and which can be avoided. So I'm pretty sure that we are going in this direction. Not guaranteed that we'll go fully animal-free, because we simply cannot do this, but the progress will definitely be there. To Mr. Hoysik's question on the substitution, is there any feedback from the stakeholders? I would say, well, in principle, it's too early to say, because we are still conducting the public consultation under the CLP regulation, and we still haven't started that for the REACH. So it's still early to say, but I think anecdotally or randomly we can say that indeed this is happening. But to which extent, and is the speed satisfactory, I can say we need more evidence on this. Also, he asked why assess the impact of endocrine disruptors if we know that they damage, and how we will assess. Well, we will use the better regulation rules and the principles in it. In principle, the bet is made. The Commission has said it wants to remove the endocrine disruptors from the consumer products. But of course, we need to calculate what it means and how we're going to do this. And when we do the impact assessment, we absolutely always calculate the health benefit of it. Not to say that it's easy, because to calculate what the health benefits will be brought about is usually very tricky. It's a lot more difficult than simply to calculate the cost to the businesses, which are very precise and a lot more easy to capture. There is a lot more modeling involved in the benefits part, but we will definitely do this, because if we don't count all these pros and cons in the best way, then simply we don't get the full story. Question to Jutta Paulus on restoration in places even of military on PFAS. I mean, again, down to the member states themselves, but if the damage has been done, the remedy has to be there. So it's again down to the member states themselves to ensure that this is done. But in principle, it has to be done. And then the last question I would like to address is Madame Rivasi's on export restrictions. Indeed, we are planning to act upon it. We are still looking for the best tool for that. Very possible that it will be the prior informed consent regulation, the PIC regulation, so to say. But the principle is there, the resolve is there, but we need to find how best to do it. And I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to find that tool. So with this, I hope that I've managed to answer this part of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will have plenty of opportunities to get back to these issues very, very soon regarding the upcoming initiatives and legislative initiatives you mentioned. Thank you to the members, and we can move now to the next agenda item number 11. We are running a bit early compared to the agenda. Just to check if Mr. Hansen is with us. He is with us. So, welcome to the ENVI committee, Mr. Hansen, for this annual exchange of views with ECHA. And I must say the last exchange of views with you personally in your personal capacity. So I will leave Martin Oisik as the contact person of ECHA, for this parliament to comment on the assessment regarding your leadership and management. But before moving to the ENVI contact person, meaning Martin Oisik, of course, the floor is yours, Mr. Hansen, for 10 to 12 minutes to have an overview of the activity of ECHA last year, but also, and maybe more importantly, to work to give us the flavor of the next months. So the floor is yours.
Thank you ever so much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Canfin, honourable members of Parliament. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, perfectly.
Very good. Thank you. And yes, indeed, I've decided to retire on personal reasons, family reasons, as of April 1st. So this will be the last time that I have the honor to talk to you about ECHA and our achievements. I do hope that I manage, or you will manage, to give me a couple of minutes towards the end so I can give you a little bit of a personal reflection, because the actual important thing is for my report now, but a couple of minutes to personally reflect on my 4 years at ECHA would be great.
It will be much welcome.
Thank you. Then I will not include that in my first 12 minutes here. And basically, the last dialogue we had was in December 2019, but of course in 2020 a lot happened, and I'll be referring to that. So this is what I'll be reporting on, is a bit what has happened since December 2019. I did have the honor to be able to report to you right before the summer this year on the conclusions of our report. Of our assessment of 5 years of functioning of REACH and CLP, but I'll also include a little bit of that in my report here. Now, since my last appearance in our dialogue, of course, a lot has happened. There's the COVID-19, the worldwide change to remote, and now the worldwide move back to a mixture, taking advantage of both the remote setting and the face-to-face settings to optimize, to improve, to create better opportunities for working. We have also gotten the Green Deal and the chemical strategy. So there's a lot of policy debate which is centered around the discussion of chemicals. As such, what we've been doing in ECHA since 2019, and I'll come with a few details later on, but what we have been doing, I would say, is consolidating the work that we've been doing, focusing primarily on our legislative tasks, increasing efficiencies, and thereby increasing our outputs and our impact. So we've also, since we last met, had quite some discussions on various topics, lead in PVC, the authorization process under REACH, but also others. And I've had similar discussions with member states and the Commission. And I think there's been a continuous, this discussion has continuously helped me and the agency better understand our role in the European framework in delivering scientific advice to, for example, you, the Commission and Council. And I think this has also greatly improved the way we understand ourselves and thereby also how we can better serve you. Now, what I'll come with is a bit of an update on the individual activities since last time. I will come with a reference to some of the learnings that we've had over the last 5 years, and I will raise up front the issue of animal welfare in my introductory remarks. If I go and look at the core or main piece of legislation that we are helping the institutions implement, then I start with REACH. And there, I would say that REACH registration, we know the last substances got phased in 2018. So we're now at a rather high intensity registration phase, but very continuous and rather predictable. And this basically means that all substances are now in the system, and we're continuously receiving updates and new registrations for chemicals entering the market. On evaluation, Kęstutis already mentioned this before, we have significantly increased the number of compliance checks we do. I reported in December 2019 that we expected a doubling of the amount of compliance checks we did in 2019. We indeed overshot that target in 2019. Last year, we were a little bit below that target. This year, we're again over the target. So I would say overall, in the last 3 years, we have more than doubled the normal output from before the discussion on compliance check. We're therefore meeting the 20% target now put into legislation from 5% of all dossiers that need to be compliance checked. And we expect we see that we're on plan to finish by 2027 the backlog of checking compliance of all dossiers on the European market and registrations. So by then we will have a clear picture of how many and which substances are still of concern needing risk management at EU level, which substances are of less concern, and indeed we will have clear track of testing on substances. On restrictions, we have delivered opinions on dossiers which are broader, covering more substances, more uses than ever before. So these are much more impactful restrictions. I think a good example is our microplastics restrictions proposal developed by the European Chemicals Agency, and also where we've done a proposal, an opinion to the Commission. Also the tattoo inks is an example of this. And as already discussed in the previous discussion with Kęstutis, we are working on PFAS. The firefighting foams will be coming in January, and in a collaboration with a number of member states, the complete restriction proposal will be coming to our scientific assessment over the summer of next year. So on restrictions, full speed forward and becoming more and more impactful. On authorization, I would say the main things that we have done is we have clarified better what our role is and also how we can communicate the result of our scientific assessments so that the Commission can better fulfill its role and you, Parliament, can better scrutinize us. This we've implemented in all the work that we're doing under authorization and thereby also continuing at full speed delivering opinions in that area. On classification and labeling and occupational exposure limit values, this is more or less routine, high-intensity work, but we are getting more and more requests for more high-impact substances, for example, the development of an occupational exposure limit value for asbestos. Biocides, I think there was mention in the previous discussion about that as well, have shown their importance in this pandemic, in particular in relationship to disinfectants. So its importance is very clear. We in ECHA have increased our support to member states for them to fulfill their obligations, because obviously there is a resource issue in member states to fulfill theirs. This is paying off. There is an acceleration, but we're not too optimistic that the program will finish on time as set out in the legislation because of lack of resources in member states. If we look at some of the additional tasks we've been getting that we label environment tasks, but these are mainly because they come from our chef de file, our DG Environment, then we have delivered on the database in the Waste Framework Directive on substances in articles, which was required. We are delivering on the Drinking Water Directive, helping the Commission implement, and there we did get the resources we needed to do the work, for which we're very grateful. And also on the 8th Environment Action Programme, we are anticipating to get resources and have already started the work to develop chemical indicators based on existing information and existing IT infrastructures that we have. So that's a bit of a report in terms of the work that we've done up until now. If I look at the learnings that we have overall looking back in the implementation of the legislation, then looking at REACH, we definitely see that substance evaluation, which is one of the evaluation legs being done in REACH, is not meeting its objective, whereas compliance check with some tweaks, for example, enabling the registration number to be withdrawn, as Kęstutis mentioned, would enable that process to be both efficient and consistent. In the restrictions area, we see overall it's working very well, but can, of course, be improved by looking at broader and even more impactful restrictions. On authorization, we definitely believe that it, as a system, is working towards the objectives of authorization, but it is not very efficient, and therefore some approach looking at the strengths of both restrictions and authorization, but also other legislation, would probably be more efficient and consistent. Overall, we observe that resources are limited in member states and authorities, so member states and authorities are having trouble meeting their obligations under the current legislation, and this is hampering on the delivery of REACH, CLP, but here also I'll throw in biocides. Compliance of industry is an issue, not only in terms of the data that we in ECHA test compliance on, but overall. And this is therefore not only REACH evaluation issue, it's an overall issue. And we do think that therefore this needs to be reflected upon on how to overcome or how to better target either compliance or getting industry to be compliant. And finally, we've also learned that the interlinkages between REACH and CLP and other legislation are definitely not delivering the efficiencies and consistency that we had all hoped for originally. We see that there is very little, if any, significant interaction and usage of the work on REACH under other legislation. That's some of the learnings. We definitely see overall that REACH as an instrument is getting there towards the objectives set, both in terms of human health and environment, internal market, competitiveness, and on promoting non-animal methods. But we are slower than expected, and we are having less efficiency and less consistency than expected. So, that's, I think, will conclude my report on what we've learned. If I turn to the animal welfare issue, then I think we've made progress in the agency in terms of looking more and more at only funneling those substances for which we expect risk management to be needed to be subject to compliance check, and thereby for generating the data. We are implementing with about 100 people in the agency the requirement to test test only as a last resort. And we're also doing a few things which actually go beyond our mandate in order to promote animal welfare issues, and in particular in the area of sharing data and predicting data. So in sharing the data, we're a driver in promoting an international worldwide format for sharing data, and we also are the ones who actually pay and develop the OECD ECHA portal, which is a unified portal to get access to data held by all authorities around the globe. Now, if I look a bit forward, I think on the animal welfare issue, it is worth noting that it's a total win-win-win-win situation for all parties involved if we would be able to move away from animal tests. It would mean that we would be able to get results about the undesirable effects of chemicals much faster. That's great for industry because they can test their chemicals in much earlier in their marketing phase and thereby screen them themselves from marketing substances that shouldn't be marketed, rather than the current system where effectively we wait until 1,000 tons before the profits are so high that the tests can be paid for that actually demonstrate that the substance shouldn't have been marketed to start out with. So that's one exemplification of the fact that such testing would be advantageous also for competitiveness, also for the internal market, also for innovation. So I think there are many other arguments on top of also the very valid ethical arguments of not using animals for such purposes that basically say we all have the same objective. The main issue here is that the current system for risk managing chemicals worldwide is based on animal studies. Look at the WHO definition for endocrine disruptors. It's about seeing effects in a full animal. And therefore, in changing the system, the whole system needs to be changed. And that decision, and also the assessment to do so, is a policy decision, which of course is a policy assessment and decision, which we of course would be very, very happy to contribute to with our knowledge and insights. So I think with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop my introduction in terms of what we've achieved, what our learnings are, and then the specific point on animal welfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move now to the NV contact person for your agency, meaning Martin Ovsik. So the floor is yours for a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Dear Mr. Hansen, dear Bjorn. Now, first of all, let me really thank you for all the work that you have done for improving chemical policies in the EU. And it was an honor for me to work with you over the last bit more than 2 years, even though the kind of physical meetings were very, very limited. Now, it was also said to me that we did not make it as an envy for a visit to ECHA before you leave the office. I hope that we'll make it later in the year to meet with the new director, who will have really big task to kind of step in your shoes, so leave them behind, although it's something which I'm hoping that the new director will have a similar mission like you have, and that is making the Europeans protected, the European environment protected, and at the same time supporting the competitiveness of the chemical industry. But let me get also to some of the points that you raised, and have a couple of questions for you, to not only be kind of commemorating your departure, kind of thanking you, but wrong term, sorry, but also really looking into the challenges ahead. Now, the Commission mentioned several options for the future of authorization and restriction. I wonder what articulation of authorization and restriction you think would work the best to really achieve the regulation of the most hazardous groups of substances that are produced and used today, and what is at stake if we delete the authorization? Now, we know that there is, despite kind of the REACH being rolled out, there is still data missing regarding many chemicals on the market that we are exposed to, which leads to the problems such as cocktail effects and emerging threats from unknown substances. Now, REACH is aimed at creating information, registration, to ease and increase the restrictions of hazardous chemicals. Now, it nevertheless takes us still too long to answer, and before we make a transition from data to regulation. What are, in your view, the key things to improve to achieve a quick phase out of hazardous chemicals? And should we be requesting data for low tonnage chemicals and polymers, or anything else? And how do you think we should be better with data? On the non-compliance, and you touched it in your speech, I'm wondering really what is the discussion with the Commission regarding the possibility to revoke registration number for non-compliant registrants? And what about the request for mandatory and regular updates on registration dossiers? There are also many really complex and overdue restrictions that will be soon proposed in Member States, for example, on PFAS and bisphenols. Now, how will ECHA support the Member States through the whole process? And do you think that we should be more strict regarding derogations? What do you think is the biggest obstacle to achieving zero pollution ambition and truly circular economy? Because we talked on in the previous presentation also, it was for me kind of the chemical strategy is an important step, but we have to look at chemicals as a really important part of the puzzle in terms of circular economy, climate, biodiversity and human health protection. So what are the issues, according to you, that we are overlooking? I'll really be keen on a visionary statement. And where do you see the role of precautionary principle in the whole thing? Are we actually using it? And last but not least, and I've been always talking about it, I think every single meeting and also in the budget committee and in budget discussions, money. Now, how do you think is ECHA suited in terms of the financial stability and the financial forecast? Should I keep on pushing the Commission for more money for ECHA? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move to the Catch the Eye. And I have, for the time being, 4 speakers. Maria Spiraki for the EPP, Jutta Paulus for the Greens, Bas Eickhout for the Greens, and Anna Adekam for the Left. So if you want to put your name on the list, please do so in the coming minutes. So we start with Maria Spiraki for EPP.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Dear Mr. Hansen, it was an honor and a pleasure to work with you during the last 2 years, especially when it focused on the chemical strategy for sustainability, in which I was one of the authors on behalf of the EPP. I would like to table two questions regarding the performance of ECHA that you have already mentioned when it comes to REACH. Where and how do you see the role of ECHA under the new EU chemical strategy for sustainability, and how much prepared is the agency for taking over any potential new tasks in terms of resources and capacity? It's not only funding. And if you do foresee any need for structural changes within the agency in order to meet the new needs, and if so, will they affect the delivering of the current task related first of all to REACH and of course to PIEC, to CLP regulations? And my second question is on the issue of animal testing, which you have already said that it is very, very sensitive. And I would like to ask for your opinion if finally is right or not, is a reality or not, but based in recent assessment, there are a lot of scenarios that there is likely to be an increase in testing of numbers on animals as a result of the commitments made in the chemical strategy for sustainability. So will the number finally be increased? And if it is, how much? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We move to the Greens. Basaikut.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Pascal. And first of all, I also would really like to thank Mr. Hansen, Björn, if I could say, I think, for the exchange of views we had on many of the issues around your agency and chemicals and the role of chemicals in our future society, indeed. I always very much appreciated how you did that. So from my point of view, it's really sad to hear that you are quitting your job. I understand the reasons, but still, it's pity. So I very much appreciated that, and I really would like to stress that. So probably then also, having done that, then maybe we can also. I just would like to ask a question more on stepping back a bit, looking at how the authorizations are going at the EU level. I think what you are seeing developing is probably something that makes you a bit sad about it. It's a kind of the legalization and more court cases that are around some of the authorizations, where quite often we as a parliament were forced to take that step against the Commission because we felt that the Commission was not dealing properly with REACH, and quite often until now the court also said that we were right in that judgment. Let's see how. There's still some ongoing court cases, as you are very well aware. I think you are also very well aware that, of course, every time ECHA was used as an argument, they have done a RAC opinion and we follow. And if you then go into the RAC opinion, for example, quite often you gave all the arguments, but it was sometimes quite hidden in it. So also giving the opportunity for politicization of ECHA, basically, using ECHA in either way. So I would be very much interested to hear from you how you see that development and how you think ECHA can do better in not being used politically, basically. And for example, I could imagine that you just refuse any opinion if there are no proper data. So there is an authorization request and you say, well, now we can all write what we know and then maybe somewhere make the point very clearly that there was insufficient data to give a final conclusion, but if you don't write that very clear, then it will be used anyhow, your opinion. So probably sometimes it's just also better to say, we're not issuing an opinion as long as the data are not there. And I would just be wondering how you see that development and how ECHA, could change its role in these authorization fights that probably we will see more often still. And for the rest, it was really a pleasure to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We move to Jutta Paulus, still for the Greens.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hansen. I really would like to echo my colleagues here that it is a true pity that you're leaving, as you're so dedicated to the chemicals issue, and your successor will have really big shoes to fill. I don't know your number, but you probably know what I'm talking about, and it has really been a pleasure working with you. As to the future developments, I think there is one loser when it comes to animal testing becoming less important. That is, of course, the breeding facilities, but I'm not very sorry for them. But that leads to my next question. How do you assess the possibility of translating the data which was developed using animal testing to a new approach, because up to now, non-animal tests had to be adopted to fitting the results of animal testing. For example, when it came to eye irritation or skin irritation, where the human skin model test was adapted to deliver worse results, actually, as to be comparable to the rabbit tests formerly used. So what route do you see to solve this issue? And secondly, I would like to know what your assessment on the benign by design approach. So to say that you do not put chemicals to registration or the market if they are not benign by design in the first place, thus saving a lot of remedy work afterwards. And let me end with just telling you again that we will miss you terribly. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry I don't have any gift for you, but when you come in person to Brussels, I would be happy to organize something when relevant. So now we move to the left, and Anna Hazekamp.
Thank you, Pascal. Dear Mr. Hansen, thank you for your presentation and also for your work. And before you leave ECHA, I have many questions for you. In your presentation, you mentioned animal welfare several times and how we need a system change to completely phase out animal testing. Could you please elaborate on how to achieve such a system change, in your opinion? And I'm very glad that you focus on animal welfare in your presentation. Can you explain what has changed? Because just a few months ago, on 18th of May, you spoke at a European Innovators Forum, and then you stated that we currently are 40 years away from being able to effectively predict toxicity of chemicals without the use of animals. However, we didn't see any evidence to support your statement then, and we would expect the director of ECHA to put maximum effort to implement Article 1 of REACH to the promotion of alternative methods, considering this aspect of REACH mandate is currently left behind. In your role of executive director of an EU agency, don't you think that you are not only misrepresenting the current state of safety science, but also undermining ongoing research efforts and investments at EU level that are prerequisite for innovation and better safety? EFSA, EMA, the United States EPA and the FDA all have put in place roadmaps to proactively reduce and replace animal testing and integrate non-animal methods. Yet ECHA actions remain limited to just 3 points when we look at the 2021-2024 work plan. Given the Parliament's disappointment at ECHA's limited ambition in this regard, which we registered in our report on the ECHA discharge, can you explain why this still does not appear to be a priority for ECHA, and will you now be working on a similar roadmap? And then my last question. The European Medicines Agency, in its regulatory science strategy to 2025, says that non-animal methods, including organoids, organs on a chip, computer models, can be more predictive than tests on animals and therefore better at protecting animal health, people health, and the environment. EMA's Innovation Task Force has been charged with the responsibility of advising medicines developers, free of charge, on the best way to use non-animal methods. Do you agree with EMA that and what plans do you have for similar work within ECHA? Thank you.
So we don't have any other members for the Catch the Eye. Before going back to you, Bjorn, we have I will give the floor to the EP representative on the ECHA Management Board for comments. Madame Alwen Martin, who is with us remotely.
Ms. Martin, please press on the speak button. Thank you. Ms. Martin, please press on the speak button. So you have the line is blue at the bottom of your page. It needs to turn red for you to be able to be heard and seen.
Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be working. So back to you, Bjorn, and of course, that's the time for your personal remarks as well.
Mr. Hansen, please press on the speak button. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And the best present I think that anybody could give me from the European Parliament is what you've already given me in terms of the words that you have expressed. So I thank you dearly for that, and I'll carry that with me in my early retirement with great dear love and care. To your questions, I see one package of questions around animal welfare, testing abilities, but also innovation, and that fits a little bit all together. It's linked also to Jutta Paulus's question, I believe it was, on design, benign by design. So I'll do that in the end. That's more forward-looking. And then I'll just go through the questions as they were. Martin, first of all, many thanks too. I've enjoyed deeply working with you and your enthusiasm and your vision, and I've learned a lot from that. Restrictions and authorization. The way we see it is that both restrictions and authorization have their impact on industry and on their behavior, and the way they do that are different. So that means that if you delete one or the other, you will remove one instrument that you have in acting on industry. In particular, authorization, we see, is a very powerful tool to push substitution in a lot of settings. And therefore, by removing it, you wouldn't have that tool at your disposal. The way we see the world there, I would almost throw all chemicals legislation in it and look at it in terms of one substance, one assessment. In effect, the substance and the harm it does somewhere, it doesn't matter which legislative framework or instrument you are using, neither the substance nor the human or environment that's being harmed care. What they care about is that that harm ceases. And therefore, the right way to look at it from an efficiency, consistency perspective is to find the most efficient instrument to address this specific concern and not divide up the substances between the legislation. So basically, you should find the legislative instrument or instruments and processes which best, in the most efficient and the most consistent way, can address the concern. And that's where we believe that looking at REACH restrictions and REACH authorization more as two ways of addressing problems, and therefore for any given substance, you might want to use one for some uses, another for other uses. In terms of the data missing, basically we believe that by 2027 we will be there in having identified which data is missing and needs to be generated compared to which data is there and shows that either a substance is a problem or not a problem, or where industry has maybe not done as good a job as they should have, but we really don't believe that the substance is of concern anyway. So we will have a much clearer picture in 2027 when we finish the compliance action plan as to what are the problems. And there we already now have quite some idea about the scope of the problems that we will face in that we will have by then when we know so much more. What is needed to quickly phase out chemicals of concern? Well, I think that, and I'll get to that later on, it's linked to the animals and the benign by design. You need information early on rather than late to be able to figure out if a chemical is of concern, and you need to do that before investments are made. But later, more about that later. In terms of non-compliance, yes, we believe that it would be very efficient if we in ECHA could withdraw the registration number when there's non-compliance. Basically, what we see is that the longer the chain of events is involving more people between what we observe in ECHA and the action taken, the less effective action is. And therefore, if we find a problem with an only representative who is situated in one member state, who's actually representing an importer in a different member state, and we see a problem, that interaction and getting things coordinated takes a very long time and very often becomes ineffective in terms of enforcement. So we believe that's a definite way of getting there. In terms of regularity and mandatory updates, the main thing that we think this could bring us is stable fee income. We don't believe particularly that just mandating people to update their registration dossiers, that they necessarily will become more compliant with that mandate. But it is good for our stability and fee income. PFAS, I think I mentioned it, that we'll be coming out for the firefighting foams in January, and we will with member states by summer next year. Basically, we are helping the member states who are actually developing the registration dossier with what we call substance identity and grouping. So basically identifying what is the substance actually and what groups or subgroups of PFAS can you find in order then to carry that grouping approach through in the restriction. Recall there are several thousand of these substances, so there is quite some inventory work to be done, and that's what we're doing. Circularity, zero pollution ambition, and looking forward. Well, I think the realization, which is embedded in the Green Deal, that the materials we have today are not circular. And all materials are a mixture of chemicals. So if the material is not circular, it's either because the material is wrong with the chemicals in them, or we don't have the right chemicals making the materials. And it's probably more we don't have the right chemicals to make circular materials. So there's an enormous amount of innovation that's needed to get us away from the chemicals that produce materials that are not circular today. We also have the challenge of energy consumption, that chemicals industry, it doesn't help only if the supply is green, also the consumption needs to be reduced. And that all is driving the need for new chemistry. And if that is combined hand in hand with a much better predictivity of toxicity, back to the discussion I'll come with in the end, then we actually can have a system where you can design chemicals to be circular, or at least avoid them being unsafe if they're designed to be circular. To your, are we using the precautionary principle enough? I mean, that's for you to judge. I think from my side, in the work that we do, we very systematically include assessments of uncertainties in the work that we do. And we very systematically, when you have a substance which is problematic, approach it by telling industry that we will have to recommend the Commission to restrict that use unless you show us differently. I think the microplastics is a good example of that, where basically we concluded microplastic presence in the environment is not a good idea. Therefore, any use needs to be restricted that leads to emissions. And the whole story was about which uses should be restricted when, in order to enable substitution and not market disruption. So I do believe that we've managed to implement it systematically, but it's of course for you, our part of it, but it's for you to, as Parliament, Commission, Council, to decide whether we've done this good enough and we've actually enabled you to take the risk management decisions, the precautionary decisions that, you need to take. If I look at Maria's, and thank you also, Maria, it's been also a great pleasure working with you and brainstorming with you and also understanding your great ideas and how we in ECHA can help support implementing them. In terms of the role of ECHA and competence and resources, if I start with resources, I believe that we have managed in the agency to consolidate our efforts in such a way that we can deliver what is expected of us at the moment. So I don't plea for more resources to do the work that we're doing today, but I do plea that we don't get given tasks without there being an analysis of new resources that come to us should we get new tasks, nor that if you want us to do more within the current task that we're doing, then we also need more resources. In terms of competence for the future, I'm confident in ECHA's strategy, HR strategy, and the way that we look at our people as a resource in the agency, that the competences we have will be continuously developed to be the competences that are needed in the future. So I'm very confident that we can continue being a competent center for chemicals management, also looking at the changes that will be coming with the chemical strategy and with time there. Sorry, then to Bas. The issue of legalization and politicization of arguments, I think they're two separate. The legalization simply shows that the work that's being done matters. And the courts, I find, are tedious in workload, but they provide clarity where there are differences of view. And therefore, the fact that we go to court, the fact that you disagreed with the Commission and we took the Commission to court where we played a role was helpful to find out what is really the way that REACH should be implemented. So I believe deeply in our legal system as being the way of creating clarity when there are entities or people who disagree and that way find a solution. And I believe that it's working that way and showing us to do that. The politicization, I believe that we in ECHA have learned a lot over the last years, that it is actually our responsibility to communicate to you in Parliament, to the Commission and to Council and also to Member States in a way that you understand. And I think that we've not done that good enough in the past, and we are definitely improving. So we've been communicating what we think, but not necessarily in a way that what we think comes across clearly. And I believe that what we've done on authorization has improved that communication, and we're definitely learning from this, and we're trying to improve in all areas to better explain what we're doing and thereby not be used politicized in the way that you were mentioning, Bas. And yes, indeed, I agree that this is, I've observed this happening, but I think it's our role to explain better for this misuse to be reduced. And also to you, Bas, many, many thanks for the kind words. Finally, before turning to animals and innovation, basically, if we can have an opinion that says no opinion because we don't have data, yes, that option is always there. Up until now, we've not had to use it. But there have been cases where we understood our role and what we needed to deliver in one way, and you in a different way, and the court has now helped us figure out how that is. So maybe this situation may occur more frequently in the future, because the court has told us some technicalities in terms of how to do authorization, where we in the past didn't get enough information and still had an opinion, and now we need more information to produce an opinion. If I turn to the system change and animal welfare and how we implement, how we see forward, then back to my introductory statement. The perfect world would be one where a company in its research laboratory manages to make 1 gram of a chemical, and that would be enough to send into a huge high throughput screening of in vitro and partially and computer-based calculations, which would then say this chemical is sustainable, is safe and sustainable, or is benign by design or not. And I think that is definitely the vision and the landing point where we all want to get to. But there are quite a lot of steps to get there. And just to say, I never said it would take 40 years. I said it would take decades. If the efforts would continue as they are being done now, if they're being done the way they're doing now, and if the legislation doesn't change, meaning that we still need to use animal studies to identify endocrine disruptors. And of course, a lot of things can change. It can become a political priority. It can accelerate. Now, for me, as I mentioned in the intro, there are basically 2 systems. Either we rely on animals, and then we work as hard as we can to make 1-by-1 replacements with that. And I believe there's a lot of room for improvement to speed up that assessment. And my decades basically came from the fact that I've been working now 31 years in the areas of chemicals management, and I've seen in these 31 years what tests have been, animal tests have actually been replaced, comparing that to the challenge of replacing the extended 1-generation reproductive toxicity study, which is designed to identify endocrine disruptors. And there, looking at the last 31 years, I do believe that we definitely won't manage within the next 10 years to replace fully that study. So how do we get there is basically to have an open discussion on what are the advantages of the various test systems, and then basically feed into a policy decision on whether it's time to change to a non-animal, or when is the time right, and if that should be done, to change from an animal system to a non-animal system. Again, it of course has repercussions, because the uncertainties in the current system we understand, and there are definitely uncertainties and imperfections in the current system, but there's not an equal understanding of the uncertainties on the other non-animal methods. And we need to have a proper discussion in order for policy to take the decision if and when to switch, and if not switching, how best to accelerate the progress towards non-animal methods, one-to-one replacement. Again, it's a policy decision, but it's one where there's a huge advantage for everybody if we would be able to get there. In terms of a roadmap or a strategy, my reflection on ECHA is that we have one obligation, and one clear obligation, and that is to ensure testing is done on animals as a last resort. The whole organization works on that. We're all geared up, and it's completely delivering on that. We don't have a mandate to develop alternative methods. That is not part of ECHA's mandate. There are other entities who have that mandate. But even though we don't have a mandate, we still actively work on the data bit, which basically is all about ensuring that data generated in one place can be used everywhere else in the world. And we're also very active in developing a toolbox which enables the best application possible of non-animal methods. I think just some indicators of how active we are. The acronym NAM was invented in ECHA. There's another trilateral project called ECHA, working with the US and the Canadians on this. This was ECHA's initiative to do this work. We started it. So it's not that we don't work on this. It's just these are not main core legislative tasks that we have, and therefore we're not reporting maybe as well to you as we should have about all the activities that we're doing. I think that more or less concludes the statements, answering the questions. My 2 minutes are simply to say that I feel enormously privileged in my whole career. I've worked 31 years for the European institutions in the Commission and in ECHA. To have been allowed to fill the positions, at least temporarily, to be, the custodian of various positions, and be allowed to be part of this absolutely amazing and wonderful democratic system that we have in Europe, which includes you interrogating me, but it also includes me trying to explain to you what, for example, in this case, ECHA thinks. I think it's absolutely amazing that our system works so well as it does, and it's very much thanks to the individual people who feel like I hopefully managed to do the posts that I've been able to do. And it's this fantastic collaboration, energy, and will to achieve a solution together, which is fascinating and is driving the union. And I must say, every day I've had the pleasure to work with Parliament. I come home, I tell my wife how absolutely amazing our democracy is and how fantastic it is to work, be part of that machinery. So with those final words, just to say I'm extremely grateful and thankful of being able to have fulfilled these roles and been the custodian of the posts, whether it was here or in the Commission. If I look forward for the European Chemicals Agency, I think you have an agency there, a competent center on chemicals, that if you give it stability in posts, not in money, because its competence lays in the people, in the staff. And we need the money to pay the salaries, but money without staff you can't spend. You have a very competent, very enthusiastic, and very, very service-oriented organization where people there are really, really ready to deliver on the European mandate. And I believe that the agency is in a good position now to be able to continue working in this direction. So many, many thanks.
Thank you, Bjorn, and that would be a cancer-free, toxic-free, pollution-free thank you from all the members to you for all what you have done and what you have been doing, because of course retirement is close but not there yet. So thank you again for your career, as you said, and your commitment. So we move now to the next agenda item, meaning the vote, the opening of the vote on taxonomy. So we have to wait formally at 4:15. So there will be a break now, and then we will start again under the chairmanship of Bas Eickhout at 4:45 on the battery text. So see you at 4:15 for the opening of the vote. I think I will be alone in the room. Yes, thank you for that. And then see you at 4:45.